And a lot of it's based upon population density. But in rural, communities, much of our indigenous communities are very rural. We don't get that prioritization because it's based upon, primarily population density. It's very rare that Superfund sites like Laguna here, the Jack Pile, and so forth are designated only if they're extremely problematic and people make a lot of noise and precipitate a crisis, so that it does precipitate cleanup. The Navajo Nation has the 5-year cleanup plan, which is initiated by Henry Waxman, and this is a testimony to actually the power of artistry and the power of artists. Return to Navajo Boy was the key, sort of that documentary was a key factor in triggering the hearings and the congressional action to implement the Navajo Nation 5-year cleanup plan. But even that 5-year cleanup plan is problematic, because out of the 523 or so abandoned uranium mines, which that's actually the claims, there are over 1,000, potentially more specific sites, and that doesn't even address the prospects, which in many cases are just as radioactive. In impacting our communities, just in the Cameron area alone, which the cleanup from Cameron, Energy Fuels right now is talking about transporting the cleanup material to White Mesa Mill, which we don't want. There's no consent, right? No consultation with the Ute Mountain Ute community. There's no consultation or consent for the communities down the road. But part of the issue there is that there's over 100 abandoned uranium mines just in the Cameron region alone. And right now the EPA has slated 19, I think, for priority cleanup. It's because they found the responsible parties. In many cases, these corporations have changed hands so many times you can't figure out who did what. But we have one site also that's owned by Babbitt Ranches, so it's on private land, called Section 9, which is extremely toxic site. It's 1,000 feet away from the Colorado River, Little Colorado River, so it's continuing to contaminate that site. But we went in there recently with Tommy Rock, who actually just recently got his PhD. So he's not. Well, no, he got his. Doing his dissertation. No, he just defended it.
Did it?
Yeah, he defended his thesis last week. So so he just got that. We were there. So, but I'll wrap this up because Section 9 is a critical example of the problems that we face in a range of different communities, because there are sites just like Section 9, but it comprises about almost 40 acres between 3 mines. And there was a site called the Upgrader site that was part of it, which essentially was a pre-processing plant, not quite a mill, not quite a mine. But we went there recently with Tommy and a crew of folks, and we had heard reports that the USGS, when they went there, their Geiger counters they went off the charts. The needles just went up and they couldn't go higher. Yeah, Section 9 site. And so, but that site, if you go there to this day, there are signs that say danger, do not enter, and Denepizod, Navajo language, but they're right in the midst of the piles. You can go into this area. If you don't have special equipment, you don't know anything is happening. But there are a range of stories like this plaguing not only the Diné communities, but New Mexico and beyond. So just to say that, yes, the mills have been addressed to some degree, but the standards right now are problematic because there's no consistent standard that's being applied. In many cases, as Chris has said, and you could talk more about this, it amounts to toxic landscaping.
So actually, we do have only a few more minutes of this panel, and sorry to interrupt you, Chris, but just to kind of focus what you guys are saying, what can we do about all these things? Writing letters to Congress, getting resolutions passed. I mean, we can keep talking about the problem all day. What do we do to work towards solutions? What will help you, Chris? I know there's always this health bill that's introduced in the state of New Mexico that never gets passed. I don't know if that's if that's even a good solution to try to push bills in the legislature with the Clean Up the Mines thing. We said it's on hold. How can we I know I interrupted you, Chris, so I'm just going to let you go. Did you want to comment on, continue commenting on this?
Well, just a couple of things. We are now roughly 25 years into the cleanup of these uranium mill tailings piles under the UMTRA law from '78, and the covers are already failing. They were supposed to be designed to last for up to 1,000 years, and in no case less than 200, and there's already being efforts to fix them. They're developing cracks, they're releasing radon. So the mill tailings problem was kind of dealt with for a while, and now it's still a problem. It's becoming more of a problem. The mine waste is a huge problem that's going to take multiple generations. What to do about it, there's thousands of things that we can do in little steps, but we have to have a long view. We have to have a multi-generational view, because so many of these communities, especially on native lands, people don't move away from the hazard. They're tied to the land, and that those chronic exposures are affecting not just the older people, but the younger people too. And so that's why we're trying to bring a lot of younger tribal people into some of the STEM science courses, while allowing them to communicate back to people that are much older and don't know some of the history of their communities, because that history explains exposure. And exposure is so important to ascertain in all of these sites. There's not enough money around to completely study all the health problems, and there's certainly not enough money to do all the cleanup. On Navajo, there have been 3 major settlements with either private parties or government agencies to the tune of almost $1.5 billion, $1.5 billion, and that's going to address only about 40% of the abandoned mines. And those are the abandoned mines that have been identified, not the more difficult, the additional 1,000 mine features. So what to do is to take the long-term look, educate each generation that comes up. That's why we like people like Eileen. She is educating the next generations that are coming up. You can advocate to your Congress people. One of the advantages of the Clean Up the Mines approach is to raise awareness that we really don't have a statute at the federal level that is oriented specifically to cleaning up the abandoned uranium mine issue, okay? CERCLA, or the Superfund law, is the only thing that EPA and the states use to really address some of these sites, and it is inadequate. It was never intended for large volume, big sites like the mine sites. And importantly, when you're working with communities on these issues, and EPA comes and or the companies come and tell you what they're going to do under CERCLA, keep in mind that when it comes down to making decisions, that are only 2 people, there's only 2 entities that count: the EPA, or the regulatory agency, and the responsible party. You can live in that community all your lives, your generations with you, being exposed, and you don't have a seat at that table. Don't believe for a second that perfunctory public engagement programs, EPA comes out and puts on dog and pony shows. That does not get you a seat at the table to negotiate the solution to these cleanups. The closest that we can come is on the Navajo Nation. There's been the Dene Uranium Remediation Advisory Commission was approved by the Navajo Council last year or the year before. There are people from the communities who are going to sit on that commission, and for the first time, some of the Navajo people themselves who have been affected will put their stamp on policy related to what to do with these wastes. And I can almost assure you that they're not going to be real down with shipping Cameron mine waste to White Mesa. The thought is that they're going to look at how Navajo Nation is going to handle this in ways that do not continue to affect the Navajo communities, but control the waste and keep them isolated for the thousands of years that it's necessary.
Thank you, Chris. So I think a lot of the things you guys are hearing, the audience, I don't know if this is maybe the first time or you already know this issue well. I know with the Clean Up the Mines work, we do need congressional support when it does go into, when we do get the bill introduced, no matter how many years it takes. But it's never too early to educate our elected officials. And I hear that the best way is to do handwritten letters. So I would encourage all of you here today to take the opportunity to hear some of these things that you're learning about There's no law or funding to clean up abandoned mines. The coverings to the tailings and all these other things are tracking, and we're going to hear more about radiation emissions when we talk about the nuclear reactors, the aging reactors, and those kinds of things. But right now, I just want to do a time check. It's basically time for a lunch break, but I think because we had this huge technical fiasco, we're going to do one more question. I know Diane had a question, and then we're going to wrap up this session. And at the end of this question, I don't know who it's directed at, but I would like to hear from each of the panelists one final thought to end and to give the audience after we hear the question. And it doesn't have to be in response to the question, but we just would like to hear some final words from each of the panelists. So,
Thanks. What I was talking, it sounds to me like when they're talking about cleaning up mines and sending waste to White Mesa or other mill areas, that it's a way to like pretend they're cleaning up. And so the thing I wanted to offer support and work together on is after that uranium goes into the nuclear reactors and it splits and it gets more radioactive and it has a whole bunch of hundreds of more radionuclides in it, then they want to send it back to the mill that was only intended to process uranium and then normal decay products from uranium, but it would bring in all the other stuff like cesium and strontium and plutonium and iodines that wouldn't normally be in the front end, and that would come back to the mill, making it, I would say, probably, I don't know how much worse, but certainly much worse. And so I fight those dumps, and I want to work with you on preventing that if that's still a threat.
so great, thanks. There wasn't really a question in there, but I think it's a good segue into Diane's offering support. Diane works with NEARS, and we also have Greta beyond nuclear. And so I think having these national organizations represented here, and then we have regional, of course, these coming out from Flagstaff and Sarah and Yolanda have traveled from the Four Corners area. So I'm just gonna go down to the table. I'm actually gonna start this way and let the ladies have the last word, because that's usually the one that sticks, and so we want to hear from them. No, but we had Chris, as Danielle asked, so I'm not going to do that. But we as women should have the last word.
The abandoned mine cleanup problem is huge. It's going to take perseverance in whatever methods, through legislation, through regulatory involvement, especially through the actions of committees. It's still reprehensible to me that we are measuring the sub-micron nanoparticles coming off these mines, and people are exposed to them on a daily basis. They're already exhibiting toxicity in laboratory mice, and I can't imagine what it's done to people who are going around. And as much as I've been privileged to work with folks out of those communities, and so I'm not as directly affected as they are. So whenever you have an opportunity to support these communities directly through funds or through advocacy, please do. They desperately need the help, and we can certainly put you in the direction of those folks within those
So the climate justice movement needs to come to categorically assert that the so-called green nuclear is a deadly bomb. And that's something that everybody here can be part of the solution to ensure that that's just not an option. I think from a policy standpoint of what people can do, how people can engage, we're in a defensive position right now because of the attacks in this administration. So anything that we can do to build community capacity for this to stop transport, stop mining, to support indigenous communities on the front line, protecting safe places on safe water. There's critical times on that level. And so we're not
There are a number of tables out there. I have some information from Uranium Watch and a sign-up sheet. If you put your name on there, I will put you on my email list. I don't send a lot of emails, but I will be putting out any action alerts and information. If you have a chance to go to law school, go to law school. Become the movement relies on some attorneys in New Mexico and Colorado, but we need more legal support. Become a scientist and put your ideas and your intelligence and your research efforts into this issue. So Uranium Watch out there, just put your name down, and the same goes for Hall No. And we communicate with each other. We're friends. And come and talk to me. Thank you. And talk to Yolanda.
I put some sheets out there on Sarah's table, so you guys are more welcome to get those and read what we had been doing during the year, fiscal year. My thing is, I would like to shut the mill down because I do not want no more hauling, because if they pass their license, then if they expand the mill, then it's gonna just be only one step away from our reservation. And that's not something that I want. I want it to shut down. So if you guys would, write letters to the NRC board, to help me out on my behalf of our reservation, that would, I'm really thankful for you guys to do that. And thank you for having me here.
Okay, and that concludes our uranium panel. This was the front end of the nuclear fuel chain, and we got a lot more to go all day. We've cut a little bit into lunch, but we have a food truck right outside the door, and I think we still have plenty of snacks outside. But please, we'll be here again starting promptly at 1:30. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Yolanda. That's great. And I'm so sorry for all this. I mean, we're just killing our land.
Yeah, we are.
I'm going to write a letter, but I'd like to get a little more info maybe on ABP specifically, if you have any contacts.
I think everything's on Sarah's table.
Okay,
yeah.
I'll check it out then.
Uranium Watch.
Okay.
Yeah, hopefully Where's the people with the lockpicks? Huh?
Here we go. Here's the problem. Oh, turn yours off? Yeah, yeah. Turn your volume down. Ready? See, that's what happens when you have no signal. You just get that hash. With that now. You get a good sound now. You hear it, but it's still. Oh, it's no better. Okay.
I could probably just pick up ambient sounds and just let this roll on for the rest of
Go back to this thing. Wait a minute. Okay, this is on, but that other thing isn't on because I'm still on standby. Okay, what's that like? The hash go away? Is it better? Still there?
It's fine. I'll just go.
Yeah, I don't understand that.
Oh my gosh, no worries, don't even worry about it. But when you do get a chance, I mean, like even this thing, I'm glad you made it to be a part of our symposium.
When I'm worried, yeah, see, what I'm thinking is,
Oh, I bet.
try, well,
Oh, they are. I was like, should I bring the cute boots? No.
try this too. Check 1, 2, check 1, 2.
Yo. Thank you. You were very supportive. I know you were trying to help, and just thank you for trying to help. I don't know what happened, but thank whatever made it work. 'Cause
So those batteries work? Those two batteries I gave you, did they work?
Yeah.
Are they fully? Are they?
They're at 2, but it should be
See,
fine.
yeah, that's the problem. I think all rechargeables, they only give you 2. But I think the good thing is they taper off.
Okay.
Rather than stop.
When all else fails, get a different projector. to acknowledge the 70th anniversary, which was on December 2nd, 2012. And I went on my first visit, a site visit to Chicago, and I saw where they buried the waste. And they left it unmarked for a long time, but when I went, they had just recently cleared the forest area and put some monuments. And immediately, my chest caved in. Immediately, my body had a very strong reaction. And so I left the area, and all I could do was cry. And so I sat there, and I didn't understand this. And so that was one of my first visceral reactions to this stuff. Of course, I was dealing with uranium mining 5 years before that, but this was my first experience with nuclear waste. And so I just wanted to read a statement of solidarity from Dave Kraft. They're in Chicago right now having a conference as well. Dave Kraft and Arnie Gunderson. And does anyone know what time this nuclear chain reaction occurred?
3:25 p.m. Chicago time.
So in a few minutes, it's going to be that time here, because it would be 2:25, but we don't want to interrupt the panel. So I'm just going to start with a statement, because they're doing the same thing in Chicago right now, and we wanted to have this kind of connection. So I'm going to read a couple statements while folks are still coming in, and then we'll start the panel. The end of the nuclear age. To our friends, colleagues, and allies, greetings and yat from Chicago. We at Nuclear Energy Information Service, NEIS, that's nice, send you our best wishes for a successful gathering and symposium. We regret that we cannot be there in person with you today, but we are right now confronting the nuclear age and its agents on the very same spot where the nuclear age began 75 years ago this day, at the Henry Moore Sculpture to Atomic Energy at the University of Chicago. We and 200 others, including Leona Morgan, gathered here in Chicago 5 years ago to announce the end of the nuclear age. Events over the past 5 years have shown we were right. It's game over time for the nuclear industry and priesthood. But like the undead, they just don't know it yet. And so they continue to victimize and threaten the only planet we have with nuclear annihilation through contamination, disasters, and recently, the threat of nuclear war. We're all down with your message. We stand with you today, separated in space, but together in heart and soul, to commit with you to making the end of the nuclear age a reality, once and for all. We wish you well, stay well, take care of one another, become the unsung heroes and Shambhala warriors that you are, even if you don't realize it yet. And do great things. Together we will change this world, or we won't get to see the Chicago Cubs win another World Series. Hugs, Dave Kraft, director of the NEIS board. And so, okay, so we're going to read another one later. We have two statements of solidarity. But yeah, with that, I got a couple housekeeping things to just take care of really quick. We got all the presentations on my computer, so if you haven't given me your presentation yet, I think we got all of them, but just check with me later. Don't forget to use social media. Please share our link for the stream, and then we're also using the hashtag Dismantle the Nuclear Beast, and then there's this one here, okay. I can't, I'm sorry, it's been a long day. It was right here for good. Hey, Marty. So, yeah, so now I'm going to hand the mic over to Eileen Shaughnessy, but for the other thing I wanted to remind folks of, don't forget to fill out the email, please. And then also we have these little pledge cards in the thing. That's also another way for us to get your emails. I know you signed up at the registration table, but the pledges are important because that's where we want you to pledge to take action. And so we're going to be doing actions. We're going to be talking about direct action tomorrow, and we're not just a study group. That's not what this is about. We are here to take action and to do it in strategic ways. So I'm going to end now and say thank you everyone for coming back, and then yeah, have a great time.
All right, thanks, Leon. So healthier fuel chain. And if you want to learn more about that, at the last page of the booklet has a very handy diagram created by the Radiation Monitoring Project that gives you a sense of that. And so we began where it all begins in the earlier panel with uranium, mining and milling and enrichment. And we learned about that this morning. And now we're moving on to weapons development, testing, stockpile, and the UN Treaty. So this panel that we have assembled here before you today, this is a really very special and historic moment to have these folks together. It's a very accomplished group. We're so lucky to have these folks, to have this conversation. And basically we want to just get a sense of, since the beginning, since the Manhattan Project, 1945 or 1942, whenever you want to put the origin point, there's been so many negative impacts, as we know. And there's waste that is created at every single level of the nuclear fuel chain. And people are negatively impacted all along the way. And so right here in New Mexico, as Leona told us yesterday, there are sites that continue to contain radioactive waste, and the testing that has been done in southern New Mexico continues to harm folks 70 plus years later. So we're going to hear about the amazing work that's being done to address those issues and to bring awareness. So I'm going to introduce the panelists. I'm going to read their bios, which are also available for you to read in our beautiful booklet. So we're going to begin with Beata Sostenius, who is from Santa Clara Pueblo in El Rito. She's a mother, poet, peace saver, musician, and is certified in ancient massage, and is an educator in permaculture design. She is also a Green for All Fellow and has served on several local community boards. The realities of living next to a nuclear weapons complex has called her into environmental health and justice work with the local nonprofit organization Haywa Women United. And she is currently managing the creation of the Espanol Healing Foods Oasis Demonstration Garden. Welcome. And I'm going to introduce folks one by one.
Testing. Umbiakindi and Sangitiiri. With your respect, good afternoon. My name is Beata. I'm from Hapoawinge, Santa Clara Pueblo, New Mexico. And I think to talk about the impacts of having nuclear weapons production in my backyard, I have to start with talking about the importance of place and where the site is located. It's in the Jemez Plateaus, which is the western part of our Tewa Heaven. This facility, Los Alamos National Laboratories, came in a very secretive way at a time when people were not going to question any kind of job creation in our communities. And for the first decade of their establishment, there was no environmental regulations. So any waste produced, any environmental releases were all just thrown into canyons, released into the air. There's an amazing amount of airborne plutonium that was released at that time. And I wasn't born yet. I came into this work about 10 years ago after hearing daily explosions rumble through our sacred landscape. Early in the morning, afternoon, evening sometimes, and I would come to find out that those were high explosive detonations from the military site. Anything that's classified as too dangerous to transport is detonated in open air on top of our mesas, on top of our watersheds. This site was also located on a dormant supervolcano, which means that it's riddled with seismic fault zones, The rock is very porous. And so you could imagine what that means for trying to clean up some of these hundreds of contaminated sites in our homelands and trying to advocate for that. A nuclear waste dump was located across from some other of our ancestral sites, Area G, as it's known as. If that's a big concern to us because it's tens of thousands of barrels of nuclear waste in unlined dirt pits, again in our sacred sites. So when I started hearing these detonations, it was a realization of what was actually taking place up there. There's a weird silent scene and around the activities that happen up at the labs culturally, and I think a lot of it stems from the fact that so much of our people are dependent on this facility for economic reasons. We all have family that works there, and it's a big contradiction that we have to be faced with not having a choice between a livable wage and jobs that align with our values and beliefs as a people, as land-based peoples. My first impulse was to get my family and move from this homecoming that I was in when I started hearing these explosives. And after praying for about it, I was fortunate that I received a call from Tewa Women United asking if I'd like to facilitate an environmental focus group around landfill issues. And so that's how I started learning and educating myself around a lot of these impacts and issues that we face as Tewa peoples. And I've been doing it ever since. And so a lot of the work we do couldn't be possible without our all of our local expertise and networks and collaborations and coalitions. The two that we're most involved in, I think, are Communities for Clean Water. And many of those organizations are here represented today also that are in that group. And then also Las Mujeres Hablan. So it's fortunate that I have had mentorship to learn about these things. Otherwise, it's really difficult to find venues to do so. And I know that we know what it is going to take to heal this place we are a part of. I know that we hold many solutions as far as addressing this, and I could go in to a lot of the contamination issues, but it would take probably an hour, so I'll save a lot of that for questions maybe. But I think what I want to say is that what grounds me in this work is those centerings located outside, our corn mothers, our water, our plant medicines, our animal relatives. And we bring those wherever we go because they're alive, they're living beings, and they don't have a voice at the table. So we bring them to the table. And just want to acknowledge that they're here listening to these issues being discussed about them, and that I carry that respect for these elements wherever I talk about this. We're talking about sacred things, so I bring that deep love and respect for our waters, for our seeds. All I want to be doing is planting my corn, planting my beans, tending to our plant medicines, and yet I wonder, tending to my children, and I wonder how I'm going to ever live a life of simplicity when we face such enormous issues in our homelands. And I know that I can't be, our food and seed sovereignty is dependent on clean air, land and water and soil. And so that's why I do this work. We're called to do environmental justice work alongside our farming and our gardening. But my people are farmers. We also have history of resistance, and I think that's also what gives me strength to do this, to keep doing this work. But really, I come from a place of my motherhood, and a very real fear of if my children are going to have clean water, if they're going to have clean soil to continue our food traditions. So I'll end with that. Kuntawaha.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Beata. All right, next we have Kathy Sanchez, who is a fierce Pueblo elder activist and intergenerational organizer who believes in beloved communities. She does activism on nuclear nonproliferation, human rights, and the rights of our Mother Earth, while integrating body, mind, and spiritual awareness into environmental justice advocacy, policy change, and community education.
Wow. She does all that? Oh, Biagandi, thank you for being here to listen to all our concerns and all the issues, and to all those way out in cyberspace somewhere, thank you for listening in. And in Tewa, Biagandi andine no hiwari, pungririo nari tumpiyo abari kagenami. So I think we left off with this slide because it is that volcano that sits in the midst, and if you can see the dot where Los Alamos is, it is amazing that Mother Earth has allowed them to even be there. I keep praying that they'll shake the land for them and that they'll soon cease with their experimentation and development. But I don't declare him my president, but Trump being there, a lot of money has poured into New Mexico to develop new modernization of weapons and weapons of mass destruction. And they're developed, tested in the Los Alamos National Laboratory, which is in our sacred lands. And so I think going back to the United Nations of 2007, when indigenous peoples were given, finally recognized as humans, human rights of indigenous peoples, that all the indigenous nations of the world should be united in this effort, especially this year that the United Nations has passed the resolution to ban nuclear weapons and to make them illegal. And of course, they're supposed to be celebrating the organization, the NGOs that ICANN, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. They were the massive ones from way back when we were young, when we went forward in trying to get nuclear weapons banned. And it's sad to say we're just talking about New Mexico. If it were to succeed or take away from the Union of the United States, it would probably be among the third largest nation with all the nuclear arsenal in the whole world. And so you can imagine how powerful and crazy our political entities are in maintaining something as unhealthy, inhumane consequences that happen when you deal with experimentation like sorcery and not knowing what they're creating. But if we remember here in New Mexico, we had major forest fires, and with those forest fires, they came to about less than 3 miles of the borders of the lab, and they wouldn't allow the forces to help with the fire there because of the national security. But then who battled that next fire were indigenous people and our indigenous men who fought the fires, and with other firefighters acknowledged that the flames were unreal. They were of many colors that they never seen before in a fire, and a lot of the other firefighters left, but the ones that stayed behind, because it was in our indigenous homelands area. But you would think that the multi-billion-dollar budget that the lab has, they would have their own forest fires. or that they would have their own way and not use our taxpayer money. As Indigenous people, we do pay taxes. I know that's something that we keep telling everybody, that we are part of having to pay for our political entities there, the politicians. So those politicians should be accountable to us, the people that know the harm, the deaths, the genocide that's still continuing, the terroricide that's still happening. The colonization mentality has left a lot of trauma in people throughout the whole world and here in New Mexico. And sometimes our own people are so traumatized that they won't speak out. And so that's why Teo Women United has 4 programs that really combine mind, heart, and spirit, in able to be well and in able to be centered and in able to be in connection with our Mother Earth. I know I've got slides, but I don't know what's on them. I said, see them. Okay, so executive order is what took away our indigenous lands, so that's a copy of it. And then thoughts are powerful, so all of us here and throughout the world, if we can focus our thoughts on positive things. And so one of the things that, statements that I usually have on my email too, is that healing thoughts, healing energy, healing light, illuminate all parts of our brain, so that the darkness that is hiding as fear, anger, shame, guilt, whatever the colonizers have put in us, let that vanish and let us be a wholeness of people, so we can stand together to declare wellness for all worlds, all peoples. So in our organization, we have included our indigenous values with the Euro-American 501c3 model in order to be centered in who we are. So these are some of our values. Next. And some more in Tewa and what it means to be of mind, heart, and spirit. And so Two World Harmony starts from within. So all of us, although a lot of the information we're getting are in our technical mindset of the Euro-American model, but if we center on healing within, we have the power to change. We have the power to make the change. So we have the power to make those that are harming us accountable for their actions, and don't be afraid to speak truth to fire. And again, this is a statement of what would be transparency. Next. So the butterfly wings are 2 worlds, the Euro-American and indigenous, working together to really strengthen our identity. If you know who you are, you know what you stand for, you know that you're not going to be defeated, no matter how much harm might come. 1 minute, okay. Okay, our mission, that's okay. Okay, so the culture of peace. In order to know the culture of violence, you have to know the culture of peace. And the culture of violence is very parasitical. It will not exist if you don't give it the energy of your being. And I think that's what the United States right now is working on, the concept of terror, terrifying us, making us fearful, putting us, like the statement earlier, in the belly of the beast. The belly of the beast is being fortified, and we're cocooned inside, and it's like that Wizard of Oz, you're being murdered, no. So please get out of the belly of the beast. When you crack that eggshell, it is calcification that has happened to keep us separated from all peoples of the world. So my message to everybody is that what we know in the nuclear industry, it's toxic, it is poisonous, it is coming from the three hierarchical model: militarism, consumerism, economic based on war and then the racism. So if we know that's what the culture of violence is, go towards a culture of peace, because that informs all of us how to be together, united, and not be judgmental in any way, because we are all on the healing path. We all need to be there for each other. So as an elder from the community, I thank all of you again, and be truthful to your mind, heart, and spirit in your deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy. Dr. Mariah Gomez is an assistant professor in the Honors College at the University of New Mexico. She is an advisory board member for the Tularosa Basin Downwinders Consortium and a board member for Concerned Citizens for Nuclear Safety. Her forthcoming book, Nuclear Nuevo Mexico, examines the effects of the nuclear industrial complex on people of color in New Mexico.
It's excuse me. It's really a privilege and an honor to be with these 5 specific people who I'm at the table with, because these people have informed my life and my work so much, more than they probably even know before. They've been doing this work so much longer. And as I've been working on this for about the past 10 years, although my history goes deeper, and I'll get into that, it's been a privilege slowly to meet them and really have them be part of my life, not just influence based on what they do. So thank you all for being here, and thank you all for having me. I want to talk a little bit about what got me to this work, and then switch over kind of quickly and talk about our health impact assessment that the Tularosa Basin Downwinders Consortium completed in February of 2017. My grandfather worked on the Manhattan Project as a laborer. I grew up in El Rancho, in the community of El Rancho, which is in the valley of Powaque, adjacent to, in a small community about 15 minutes from Nambe, adjacent to Posogue Owinge, which is San Ildefonso Pueblo, known as San Ildefonso Pueblo in the colonial name. My great-grandparents were farmers. They were displaced from the Pajarito Plateau when the federal government came in with that notice of eviction, and evicted them and other farming families who had been ranching there, and basically picked up where the Pueblo people and their ancestors had been for many, many years before that. After my great-grandparents were displaced and these other families were displaced, they returned and started farming back in El Rancho and these other communities, which is where my family still farms. When the Manhattan Project came in, my grandfather and his 4 brothers became laborers on the project. They all died of cancer. I never met my grandfather. He passed before I was born. And so that, for me, I literally was born into this, right? We don't choose this work, a lot of us. This work chooses us. It's weird when, I'm identified as a professor, and it's unfortunate that we don't have more representation from UNM here, right? Thinking about the people who study these issues and whatever, and aren't here, but that's a whole nother story. My point in bringing that up, though, is to say that this is not just a book that I'm writing for a university job. These are the stories of my community, of my family, of my neighbors, and of other people who I've had the chance to meet, and some who I never did meet. And so when I started working on this about 10 years ago as a graduate student, I was still pretty young, when I started learning about these issues, and my cousin had just passed away. He had been involved in 2 spills at the lab, and over about a period of 10 years, he ultimately had full organ failure and died from that. And that was kind of the genesis of when I started this work. I started focusing on the effects of the Manhattan Project on people of color in northern New Mexico, not just indigenous people, not just Nuevo Mexicanos, but all people of color, African American people, Asian American people, and really the conclusion that I came to at that point was that New Mexico has undergone 3 significant periods of colonization: Spanish colonization, American colonization, and nuclear colonization. And I began to look at not the process of colonization, because so many people have talked about that, and we continue to, and it's important that we do, and I still do too, but looking at coloniality, which is the effects of that nuclear industrial complex, and that nuclear colonialism and colonization. And as I began to look at northern New Mexico, I realized, or as I continue to look at northern New Mexico, I realized that it is not just northern New Mexico, it is all of New Mexico. You know, we talk about December 2nd. Tina and Joni hear me say this all the time, I don't believe in coincidences. July 16th, 1979 was referenced earlier, the Church Rock uranium spill. On July 16th, 1945, the Trinity test occurred in southern New Mexico. Most people consider it close to Alamogordo or the White Sands Missile Range, and what they neglect to acknowledge is all of the small communities of people of color primarily who surrounded the Trinity test site. And I contacted Tina Cordova a couple of years ago and, you know, wanting to learn more about the Tularosa Basin Downwinders Consortium. And within that communication, I began working with the Downwinders. We got funding, we are grant funded to work on a health impact assessment, otherwise known as an HIA. HIAs are completed all across the country on a variety of issues, and the purpose of them is to look at how a specific policy or law would impact the health of any given community. And so the policy that we began to investigate is the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, otherwise known as RECA, or some people call it RECA. And we looked at the effects of RECA, that an amended RECA would have on these communities in southern New Mexico, but also acknowledging that as New Mexicans, we are all downwinders of that Trinity test that occurred in 1945. Even all the way through Mexico, if you talk specific numbers in the way that the testing is set up. And so with RECA, it's actually split into 3 parts. The amended RECA, which was passed in the year 2000, was broadened, but it still doesn't include New Mexico downwinders. So it covers downwinders from the Nevada test site. It covers on-site workers, so some people who are working in New Mexico on certain projects or tests are covered by that because they were on-site workers. And then it covers uranium miners, but not all uranium miners and millers and workers. Only those who worked in the industry before 1971, as if 1971 everything just stopped, right? We know that the Jackpile Poguate mine was the largest open pit mine in the world through the 1980s. And so we have been working with MACE. I think somebody will talk a little bit about that. We've been joining efforts with MACE recently and the post-71 uranium miners to try to get RECA amended. And so we've been using this HIA to do that. The HIA has looked at the effects that RECA would have on these communities in terms of their physical health, their emotional health, and their genetic health. I was talking to somebody who's here today who I had met in February, and we were talking about how her health issues, her family was from Socorro, one of these small communities adjacent to the Trinity site that has been significantly impacted, whose health has been significantly impacted. And, you know, she's having issues related to radiation exposure. And they asked her people ask her, when were you exposed to radiation? Well, it's genetic, right? You know, with some of these older individuals who are exposed to tests like the Trinity test or other types of, you know, uranium or radon or whatever, there's a latency period for them to develop these illnesses. Well, if it's genetically impacting us the way Beata referenced earlier, you know, in my community in northern New Mexico, we see it significantly, right? And so this health impact assessment has now become a tool for us to try to go out and lobby and coordinate efforts across the country with people from Guam that I think Tina might reference, people who are trying to amend RECA because the government owes it to the people of New Mexico who they wrongfully tested on, right? Because that bomb was exploded and nobody knew about it and nothing was done about it, and that radiation is still in our atmosphere. So I can cover more or go into depth on anything in particular on the HIA or anything else during questions and comments. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mara. Tina Cordova is a native New Mexican born and raised in the small town of Tularosa in south central New Mexico. In 2005, Tina co-founded the Tularosa Basin Downwinders Consortium with the late Fred Tyler to bring attention to the negative health effects suffered by the unknowing, unwilling, and uncompensated innocent victims of the first nuclear blast on Earth that took place at the Trinity site in south central New Mexico. Tina has a Bachelor of Science and a Master of Science degree from New Mexico Highlands University, where she majored in biology and minored in chemistry.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be with you today and to have been invited to participate in this very important symposium. It's also a pleasure to be able to participate in a panel like this with people who I consider to be experts and lifetime activists and advocates on behalf of the people of New Mexico. I am the co-founder, as Eileen has said, of the Tularosa Basin Downwinders Consortium. I'm a downwinder. I'm a cancer survivor. I grew up in a small community, lived a very organic lifestyle, and I want to talk about that in just a moment. Most of us who have suffered as a result of the Trinity test did so because of our way of life. And I coined the phrase many years ago that we were the unknowing, unwilling, uncompensated, innocent victims of the first atomic bomb, because that is quite accurate. I could tell you stories that are mind-boggling, but to give you an example of how little our government cared for the health of the people of New Mexico, we heard a story at one of our town hall meetings recently about how a gentleman was in college here at UNM, and on July 16th, 1945, he drove from Albuquerque back to Tularosa, and when you turn east at San Antonio, that was a dirt road, as were most of the roads in New Mexico at the time. And he was crossing that dirt road to make his way back to Tularosa to take the family car home that he shared with his family. And they didn't even have the sense to close that road. And by the time he got to Tularosa, he had what he described as maybe the worst sunburn of his life. And that man has suffered ever since with a multitude of different cancers. And you know what he told me? He's in his 90s. What he told me was, I felt horribly guilty because I brought the radiation home with me and I lost both my parents and my sister to cancer. He never thought about the effect that it had on him. There was no concern given to the people of New Mexico when they did the test at Trinity, and there's been no concern given to the people since then. The Radiation Exposure Compensation Act was set up 27 years ago. It has paid out over $2 billion in claims to other people. Everybody in New Mexico should be standing up and shouting out that that is so unfair, and this is a moral and an ethical issue, nothing more, nothing less. That $2 billion would go a long way in taking care of people, but what's more important is there's this health care coverage card that they give you, right? I went to a meeting recently of the Cold War patriots, and I had a hard time remaining composed because they talked about the benefits that people receive when they get one of those cards. They get the best care available, no questions asked, no co-payments, no co-insurance, no limits, no cost for medication. They can go any place that they need to go to make sure they can take care of their health. They get 24-hour, round-the-clock nursing care. My father died of cancer at the age of 71 after suffering like an animal for 8 years. I can't tell you how many times in the middle of the night I had to Google search, process to get him through the night. My dad had no risk factors for the cancers he had, except that he was a 4-year-old child living in a downwind community after the Trinity test. They detonated that bomb 100 feet off the ground, and they created this enormous radioactive fallout. For days afterwards, the history is very well documented. For days afterwards, an ash settled out on everything. The soil, the water, and we're living this really organic lifestyle. We have no running water in any of these little villages. You can't turn a tap on. You go to your cistern and you dip water out. Okay, that is all now contaminated. You grow everything you eat because there's nothing you buy in a grocery store because you have no refrigerator. You have an ice box if you're lucky, and you might be able to maintain something in there for a few days. But for the most part, you're growing crops. You have a vegetable garden. You have a fruit orchard. you're hunting or you're raising animals for consumption. You raise chickens for eggs, you have a milk cow or a milk goat. Everything was contaminated after that day. There was no warning before or after, and people were maximally exposed. We have been battling all these years to bring attention to the fact, and now we've had 2 hearings in Congress postponed. Our bill has been entered into Congress for 7 years, and for 7 years we've never even seen a single hearing. Well, twice now they've scheduled a hearing in the Senate Judiciary Committee, and twice they've postponed. We were supposed to leave on Sunday. We bought tickets. We were supposed to testify before the Senate Judiciary this Wednesday. We were overjoyed at the thought of finally getting having a chance to tell this story. Everybody should be concerned if you're a New Mexican, not just because you're a downwinder, but because our state is stricken with this poverty that I know is related to the fact that we have uranium miners who are made sick and we have downwinders that are made sick. We have 44% of the people in New Mexico relying on Medicaid for their health care. We know because of the health surveys we collected during our health impact assessment and because of the meetings that we held, the focus group meetings that we held, that a certain number of that 44% are downwinders and uranium miners. And those people are being taken care of by the federal government other places. In New Mexico, every year our state legislators are trying to figure out how to balance the Medicaid budget, right? And where do they always take the money from? From our children's education. So if you don't consider yourself to be a downwinder, consider the fact that your children are very much affected by our state having to take care of downwinders who can no longer work, who can no longer provide for themselves, and have no other option but to resort to Medicaid. And thank God we have Medicaid. So I'm here today to make sure that people understand what it's like to be a downwinder and what it has meant for the people of New Mexico, and how unfair it has been for us to struggle with this for 72 years with not one bit of acknowledgement of what we've given. And I always say, we have nothing left to give. We bury our loved ones all the time. And when we bury one, not long after, another one is diagnosed, and another one is diagnosed. We have nothing left to give. We've given everything. And we've been robbed of the hope for a future of good health. And I tell people all the time, all you have to do is talk to somebody who doesn't have their health, and they'll tell you the only thing that matters in life is your health. So thank you, and I'll look forward to maybe engaging with some of you in questions and dialogue as a result of this.
Thank you, Tina. Joni Ahrens is a co-founder and executive director of Concerned Citizens for Nuclear Safety. Concerned about the proposed transportation of nuclear waste from Los Alamos National Labs to the Waste Isolation Pilot Plant on St. Francis Drive in Santa Fe, in 1988, she produced public education materials to inform the community. She continues that work today.
Good afternoon. It's such a pleasure to be here. I'm going to talk a little bit about Los Alamos National Laboratory, and I'm going to call it LANL, L-A-N. And then on the other side, on the lower side, is the perchlorate plume. And this is a 2013 LANL report, and it says, you know, we've got a perchlorate plume and we have a chromium plume, and I can talk more about the harm from those chemicals. But they're fast-moving chemicals and they're showing up, and here it is. But look, this is the report that they just submitted just a week or two ago, where the perchlorate plume has disappeared. And as Sister Marlene said, it's like Abraham and Sarah. Once it's there, now it's gone. But this is the other part, is that the plume has changed. The shape of the chromium plume has changed. And you can see, you know, the blob that way. And so now it's moving towards this PM3, which is a drinking water well. And this raises a whole new set of issues that CCNS is addressing with all of this. So one thing that, in this brief overview I wanted to offer, I do give a toxic tour, quote unquote toxic tour of the lab from public space. And if anybody's interested in going, please talk to me and I'd be happy to take you, because I'm always interested in others learning about what's going on. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Joni. All right, our last panelist, Jay, is going to go, and then we're going to open it up to a Q&A. So Jay Coughlin is from Nuclear Watch, New Mexico. He's worked successfully against radioactive incineration at the Los Alamos National Lab and in the Clean Air Act, Freedom of Information Act, and National Environmental Policy Act lawsuits against the Department of Energy. Among other things, he prompted a 2006 independent study that concluded plutonium pits last at least a century, leading to congressional rejections of new design nuclear weapons and related expanded plutonium pit productions.
Okay, there we go.
It's either that or really dim.
Now just move the slides by doing that. Okay. All right, if it's dark, I'm afraid I'll put you all to sleep, but here we go. You know, it's nice to see old friends and colleagues, so hi you all old folks, but you know, I especially like seeing young people here, and that's good. I want to particularly appeal to you all, you know, to get involved. And I'll start off just by dating myself. I was 12 years old during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I can tell you that the fear of nuclear Armageddon was palpable in my childhood. I used to have nightmares about it. And when the Cuban Missile Crisis happened, my father was a military advisor on the island of Taiwan. And I remember the adults saying, "Oh, we better go back home because of the Cuban Missile Crisis." Then they all went, "No, wait a minute, we're probably safer here on the other side of the world." So, you know, I'm just using this personal story to illustrate, I mean, we are talking about global catastrophe, and all you know, quote, young ones are blessed with such stalwart leaders such as Trump and Kim Jong-un, and, you know, get concerned. They can really ruin your world. So, again, I'm appealing to you all, to the younger folks, to get involved so we can have a world for children, grandchildren, etc. Now, knowing that time is limited, this panel was billed as being about the treaty and about nuclear weapons research and production. So my presentation is essentially about how the U.S. is in no way observing the treaty and is not about to sign. But the treaty itself, which was passed by 122 countries at the United Nations in June, and now signed by 53 countries, you know, it's the first treaty to outlaw the final class and the ultimate class of weapons of mass destruction. And we need to look at the irony that there has already been long existing prohibitions against chemical and biological weapons, and also landmines and cluster munitions and that kind of thing. And here it is now that finally we have a ban against nuclear weapons, which of course the United States and the other nuclear weapons powers are staunchly opposing. Now, do turn your TV on December the 10th and watch the Nobel Peace Prize award ceremony. Again on the 10th out of Sweden. It's probably at some ungodly hour for us, but it is remarkable. I think it was a very shrewd move by the Nobel Award Committee to grant the international campaign for the abolition of nuclear weapons, giving it the Peace Prize and the visibility that it deserves. Now, that's all I'm going to say about the treaty, because the rest of it is how the U.S. is not doing diddly squat towards honoring the treaty, and in fact, doing the opposite. And one of my major points I want to get across is the special responsibility that we as New Mexicans have to help encourage and work towards a future world free of nuclear weapons. And the reason why that is because we have 2 of the 3 nuclear weapons labs in this country. We also have the nation's only deep geologic repository dump for nuclear weapons production waste down in WIP. And I'm quite frank about it. We have a New Mexican congressional delegation that, in my view, is just slavish towards the nuclear weapons industry. And I'll get into that a little bit more later. But we also have an advantage in that as a state, despite our large size geographically, our population is relatively small, and we have a surprising degree of access to our congressional delegation, and we got to be leaning on it. And Leona is already giving me a hard time here, so I better move along. This graph speaks for itself. You know, whatever the labs say, whatever the fluff is that you see in their newsletters and the like, you know, don't be fooled. They're all about nuclear weapons. That's what they exist for. And towards that end, I'm somewhat of a wonk. I follow the budgets pretty closely, etc. But here's the money. You know, I like to quote Bob Dylan, "Money doesn't talk, it swears." And this is the story on Los Alamos. It's 70% nuclear weapons, the core research and production programs, and much of the remainder indirectly supports those programs. Just note in counterpoint how money for renewable energies is, if I'm reading it correctly, it's 0.19%. So it's absolutely minuscule. There's much to be said about plutonium pit production. I can't talk about it too much here, but this is also one of the main reasons for the laboratory and its future. But having said that, there's an article in the New Mexican today pointing out how everything costs so much at Los Alamos. And there are 2 other sites under consideration. One of them's the Savannah River site, which Lindsay Harper is from, sitting in the back there. And the other one is up in Idaho, but we trust that our allies and colleagues will stomp that idea of moving it to Savannah and Idaho. And I want to keep them surrounded here and, you know, basically work them down over time. It should be noted that future production is all about future nuclear weapons designs. There is none scheduled for the existing stockpile. Now on Sandia, which is only a couple of miles from us right now, Leona's saying I got 1 minute. Sandia kind of flies under the radar and in a lot of ways is the real foreman of the nuclear weapons complex. And if you read these graphs quickly, you'll see that the Sandia nuclear weapons program slightly exceeds that of Los Alamos's. And that's not generally known. And so folks here, and especially at UNM, I urge you all to pay more attention to Sandia, and maybe we can get into it a little bit in Q&A. Now we got this $1.7 trillion modernization going on. It started under Obama, and it's just going to accelerate under Trump. And it's a complete makeover of the delivery systems, that being the missile subs and bombers, and complete rebuilding of the existing warheads, while also giving them new military capabilities. Now, this slide is particularly wonky. I stuck it up there only to underscore how our existing weapons are being given new military capabilities, and that in fact the lethality of the stockpile is being tripled. And all of this is through the installation of a new kind of fuse that tells the missiles, the warheads, the bombs when to go off. And it's a matter of increased accuracy. This is three-dimensional accuracy, also includes heights of bursts. But the underlying point is that far from moving towards abolition, we are actually making our nuclear weapons stockpile far more lethal. And it's only going to get worse under Trump. And then my last slide, the last substantive slide, Leona's giving me the thumbs up. I've been doing this for close to 30 years. And I would say our biggest problem is, I've already stated that our New Mexico congressional delegation is slavish towards the nuclear weapons industry. And what that really is about is jobs, jobs, jobs. And I don't have a good answer, but I'm convinced that politically and culturally and socially, we are not going to prevail against nuclear weapons programs in New Mexico until we're able to come up with some kind of alternative source of jobs. And I'll give you one quick anecdote, and I will stop. But right now, the US is creating the world's first nuclear smart bomb. It's an existing bomb, a dumb, so-called dumb gravity bomb. Now it's being refurbished with a new fuse and a new tail fin kit that will steer the weapon down towards the point of impact. So again, it's the world's first smart nuclear bomb. Now it was Tom Udall who blocked a cut to that program back in 2012. And when asked why he opposed that cut, he publicly stated it was because he wanted to save 200 jobs in the state of New Mexico. Now that's a hell of a way to formulate national and international nuclear weapons policy. So I'm concluding with that. We're not going to win until we find alternative jobs for this poor state. And that's that.
All right, thank you so much, Jay. Well, we've got a little bit of time. We're going to eat into the break just a little bit because we really do want to Q&A, have some time for Q&A. So where are questions? Raise your hand and I'll come find you with this microphone. Okay, Leona will find you with the microphone. All right, we've got one here. Everybody raise your hand if you've got a question for this awesome panel. Any other questions? Okay, then Ray back here, and then...
My name is Brenda Cole. Now, I have a question for Dr. Gomez. Cancer is one thing, but have the families who have been exposed been tested for other things like genetic changes and epigenetic changes and birth defects as a result of these exposures?
Yes, so one of the things that we have been looking at is epigenetic inheritance, and not from a, so it's kind of a twofold answer. The first part is that people will discredit our research in some ways because they say it's anecdotal, right? Because since 1945, there has been none at all, evaluation of the effects of the radiation of the Trinity test. So because of that, we have no scientific data, right? And there's another part to that story that I won't get into if anybody else wants to, because there are other people familiar with that. Anyway, so it's not just the cancer. And the health survey that we've created, we collected approximately 800 health surveys, which served as part of the data for the health impact assessment. So we are documenting other types of illnesses. There are a specific amount that are covered under RICA, and we're also noticing things like dementia. We're noticing, I was telling a story, autoimmune diseases, thyroid diseases, lots of other types of diseases that are linked specifically to radiation poisoning or exposure. So I'll keep it short, but yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Gomez. I wanted to thank all of you. What an amazing, font of knowledge and experience and all the things you did. And I don't want to diminish the contribution from the male partner, but it's really nice to see all the women up there and the women of color. In my experience, I was disoriented before even asking a question about it. And I was also told that I was looking a sleeping bear that has a tremendous economic presence, to the tune of 2.7 billion or something, some number that I wouldn't be able to understand. And I kept asking questions, and I know that Dave McCoy will be here tomorrow. We'll be talking specifically, I think, about some of the things that are going on there. But there's some stuff going on in San Diego, as you say, just down the way. And it's really criminal. I mean, it's beyond just stuff that's happening. It is criminal and it is directed at this community. One of the things that I learned from asking these questions was that when I asked, is Albuquerque a target for one group that's going to be setting off nuclear bombs? And I was told yes. I said, what will be the effect in Albuquerque? And the answer was, it'll become a sheet of glass. I mean, it won't be a situation where people will be found dead, but they will be encased in glass. So, yes, it was not only ask the question, but it was really strong, and thank you for it. Although Tom Udall and Martin Henry are good people, I think, except in this area.
Okay, I'm not quite sure what I'm supposed to answer, but yeah.
The question is, do you have the information about the warheads that are stored at Manzana Mountains? I was told upwards of 5,000 warheads that were supposed to be shipped out, and when I asked the we can neither confirm nor deny.
Well, nobody knows, because first of all, it's classified. So nobody knows the exact numbers. There is for sure the Kirtland Underground Munitions storage facility, which they moved it out of the Manzanos, and it's now less than 2 miles south of the runways at Albuquerque International Airport. I know where to look, but there's not much to see. It's just pretty much flat ground, and it's all underneath. It's believed to be up to 2,500 intact warheads. They're not in the active stockpile, they're in reserve. They're the weapons that George Bush Sr. withdrew in the early 1990s. Now, I know I can't hog too much time. My second point is that Sandia, and more specifically Kirtland Air Force Base, is a nuclear weapons complex unto itself. The Air Force has its National Nuclear Weapons Center. It has the Space Laboratory. It has the Underground Repository of Warheads that I just mentioned. And it has Sandia Labs. So Kirtland Air Force Base is an extremely powerful entity. Concerning economics, and I'm going to have my graph out as a handout, but the annual budget at Sandia is around $3 billion. But one thing it does is claim an economic multiplier of 3, which is, if you know any economics at all, is pretty much impossible. It's a real difficult thing to refute. But in the decades I've been doing this, let me say there's a lot of economic propaganda that DOE puts out. I would observe that during the 70 years that we've had the nuclear weapons industry here in New Mexico, how come we've gone, this is Census Bureau data, how come we've gone from 37th in the country in per capita income down to 47th now? Where's the benefits, the broad benefits for all New Mexicans instead of just on the hill at Los Alamos or just around Sandia here?
All right, do we have one more question? Leona? Okay, all right, Leona.
Okay, sorry. Jump in here. I was wondering, specifically for the pueblos nearest to Llano, what can we do?
I think Tehuim United has 4 programs, and it's because we've noticed a lot of the impacts to women and children. And so I think outside sources to help with making sure that we do have a health clinic that is for women and children, that would be a plus, because those are the ones most impacted immediately, because it passes through the placenta barriers, and we are seeing an increase in the inability to have births, and then there's a lot of miscarriages happening. So I think coming at from a woman's perspective on all this is a really strong plus that we need to encourage, and outside assistance will be greatly appreciated, as opposed to if we went politically from the top down, government to government. That is sort of like a man's territory where women aren't allowed to really voice concerns. But I think if we come from it from connections to Mother Earth in our mind, heart, and spirit, and make that pressing point to go by, I think that would be good. And then water qualities are different in that when you talk about sovereign nation and how they deal with their water sources and stuff like that. But if you're talking about a regional aquifer being contaminated with those, I think it goes beyond just Pueblo boundary issue, so that would be good to have that. I don't know, Bianca.
There's a lot of ways. I think one is really working to form those relationships with tribal nations that our government is not willing to do on a government to government level. So can we as people recognize place and that these are tablelands that we are on, and start to bridge relationships with the peoples who still exist here, who deserve health care, as Tina was mentioning, advocate for these RICA amendments that TBDC is putting forth. Go to communities for clean water. There's a shared value statement. Join us in our value system and our love and respect for water that we hold. Help to support that indigenous issues around food sovereignty and return to our traditional foods as much as possible. And what is it going to take for that food and seed sovereignty to remain strong in the face of a lot of these environmental impacts? You know, and again, we need people, we need students learning environmental law. We need students learning a lot of these ways that they can advocate for health, that they can even perform these health studies that we so desperately need in the face of environmental and scientific racism, where the harm that we know is happening, unfortunately, isn't given much attention unless it's validated by the scientific community. So we need that scientific community to help elevate the issues that we see happening. You know, until this racism is eradicated, unfortunately, that's what we face. There's a lot of kind of networks and that you can get involved and stay informed on when public meetings and hearings are happening. Like, show up and give your comment. You don't need to be a scientist to come to these hearings. I know they're not culturally relevant, they're often boring, but come and give your perspective as much as possible. We need more public input other than NGOs that are, you know, probably some of the only ones that show up to these hearings. Like, come and learn, and that's the other piece too, is we have to educate ourselves, unfortunately. If you don't know what a picocuri is yet, start learning about it.
So thank you so much. I'm going to actually ask everybody to give one last statement, if that's okay. And because what's coming next is student presentations. So the younger generations, if you want to tailor your final statement to the younger generations and what you have to say to them, that would be wonderful. Let's do what we did before. We'll start with Jay and we'll end with the women.
I wanted to pick up on the Pueblo business and just observe. Well, first of all, Isleta Pueblo, about a decade ago, forced the city of Albuquerque to do a major revamping on its sewage treatment. And this was all about water quality in the Rio Grande. Now, I would like to assert that the tribal government of San Ildefonso could do the same thing in an analogous way to Los Alamos. As Los Alamos Canyon runs, San Island's directly downhill from Los Alamos, and it is an indisputable fact that plutonium contaminants are going down that canyon across San Island to the Rio Grande. And I don't have any inroads myself into the San Ildefonso tribal government. I'm merely stating I would love to see them get tough with Los Alamos. It would make a real difference.
So CCNS has been around for almost 30 years, and for almost 30 years we've been producing the CCNS News Update, which is broadcast on KUNM on Saturday night. We also do an MP3 that's on our website, and you can sign up to get our social media. So a lot of times when these hearings and things come up, CCNS puts together a public comment period. We put together sample public comments that you can use. So if you go to nuclearactive.org, you can sign up and be part of this network of folks that provide this. And CCNS provides a lot of technical work for communities, and we have a fact sheet up there on that table about the work that we've done in communities around over the last 30 years. One thing that I didn't include was the huge win we had on stopping some open burning with Table Women United and the Embudo Valley Environmental Monitoring Group at 3 different sites at Los Alamos National Laboratory. But we also have CCNS also has a Facebook page and a Twitter account, and so, yeah, so tell them to sign up at your site too.
So I was remiss. We have a handout, and Sue has them, and she'll pass them out for anybody who wants them. We have a website. You can go and learn everything you ever wanted to know about us there at our website. Also, at the table in the back, the uranium miners and the downwinders decided that one of the things we would do this year is bombard Senator Grassley's office with these postcards to remind him that we exist out here and that we need a hearing. And so what I do every week is I put a stamp on it, I sign it, but I write him a message and I say, do the right thing, Senator Grassley, schedule a hearing. And you can write your own personal message, take a few of them with you, and just promise to send them out. You can also contact his office via their website and just remind them that we need to have these hearings. I will tell you that our Representative Ben Ray Lujan is very actively pursuing a hearing on the House side. His office is maybe the most involved in this issue, and we're very proud of the work he's done, and he has requested already twice that they do that, and they're taking a look at what they think the bill will cost, because that's the stumbling block. They keep telling us there's no money to amend RECA. So, yes? Yes, the hearing is to pass the amendments to RECA. So we have the fact sheet and then we have the postcards at the back. Thank you very much.
And Susan Gordon sent, there's a jar there and there's stamps in the jar, so that if you want to just take care of everything today, you could make a donation of a stamp and then send it off.
As Tina mentioned, the website is www.trinitydownwinders.com. It's actually at the bottom of the fact sheet. You can access the health impact assessment, the final report, on that website. I would encourage the students to go and read that report and learn more about how to conduct health impact assessments in your own communities. I think that if we were to start, get some momentum going and do additional health impact assessments in some of these other communities across the state of New Mexico as it relates to nuclear issues, we may create a different set of community knowledge, right? The knowledge is there, it's documenting some of that. And then as a final point to the students, I am teaching atomic bomb culture again next semester, portrayals of race in nuclear literature, film, and music, UHAN 205, section 003. There's some flyers at the back. You have a great base with what you learned in Eileen's class. So if you're looking for a way to continue some of this work, come join me.
Okay. So to the students, in understanding yourself and knowing who you are, and understanding how a culture of violence uses terror and tactics. So we have developed historical trauma. We talk about the trauma rocks and how you can, if you're going to dismantle the beast, you have to understand the beast is within us. It has grown inside of us, and how do we get out of that cocoon, or how do we get out of that, and then what we need to do in order to be strong in knowing who we are and who you are. And then also, I think we're talking about writing letters. I think one of the sister organizations, Hope, has done a letter writing where we've asked people from all over the world and people to write to our tribal nations and thank them for having their centering of concern around women, girls, and stopping violence against Mother Earth. The more they hear that other people are paying attention to what they're doing, that they'll become more aware that what they're doing isn't just within the tribal boundaries, but it goes beyond that. So that would be a good positive way. And tribal nations are recognized, some of them, but not all of them, within the United States. And so going to a UN outside indigenous status, that they have power that goes beyond just going from a sovereign nation to nation within the United States. I think understanding that the global connections of all people's lives, especially when you're talking about nuclear annihilation and what would happen, that we really need to not be fearful, but also be empowered to make those stops happen and the dismantling happening. Good.
I would just add also not to take for granted the power of collective prayer and spirituality that we all hold in the face of such enormous, oftentimes helpless feelings. So in thinking about our aquifer, the chromium plume, beneath Sandia, our Rio Grande, think of all these water sites that connect us all and that we all share, and how our continued existence is linked together, how our survivals are linked with the survival of tribal nations here in New Mexico and elsewhere that are all impacted by the nuclear weapons complex in this country. So I'd like to honor Dr. Imuro at this time, if everyone could join me in a prayer to heal our water. If we could please stand. If you could just visualize in your mind's eye, in your heart, in your spirit, places of water source that are dear to you. And repeat after me. To the waters of the world, we are sorry, please forgive us. To the waters of the world, we love you. To the waters of the world, thank you. Kundoha.
Here we go, check. Let's give a round of applause for our incredible panel here. And I know that we didn't have enough time, and I know that there's more questions, but these folks will be around, and we can share some contact information if needed. We're going to take a break that's not really a break, so take about 5 minutes to transition into the student presentations, but I hope people will be able to stick around because these students have worked really hard and they were excited to share their research with you.
Will all the student presenters come down here and talk with me to set up your PowerPoint? Student presenters, I need you down here.
Can you tell them to sit in front? Yeah.
I don't know, but I need to know who gets outside. Okay, she's busy. Just tell me who's first. You guys can decide, I'm sure, or figure it out. So is everyone here? I have. Okay.
The PowerPoint. No, wait, you can't even read it. Don't delete it. I didn't delete it. Okay. It's part of just these guys' presentation. The only way I can play on the PowerPoint is if I have them on. I get it. Yes. I'll-
Just plug it. Just say check out.
Can you send me the link?
Cool.
So it's like it's part of Eileen's email. Like it's connected to it. That's what her is. Is that Gmail? You know. Don't forget to announce the pledges and to drop them off. Do that right now. And also plug these.
Okay, so we're getting ready for the student presentations, which is my personal favorite. And we're queuing up the students right now. We're getting their presentations together, and I wanted to make a couple announcements. So we have an awesome art exhibit out there, and we actually have some art for sale as well. I wanted to bring your attention to the VR exhibit, which is about a 9-minute presentation, I guess. It's a video virtual reality tour, sort of. It's in the little alcove in the lobby. And what you do is you put on this mask, and I don't know what they're called, a visor thing. So you will actually be in an area that Native people, my people, Diné people, were forced to have to relocate. So I always say, when they talk about relocation and that kind of thing, it's not of the past. Our people are still being relocated today because of the United States. And so what's going on with the areas out there, you can learn about it. You will hear directly from people impacted by uranium mining. And so you put on the goggles, and then you'll be in that for 9 minutes. So check that out. It's really cool. And we also have, what's up? Oh, and then we also have, don't forget to fill out the eval forms. So if you guys haven't, we have evaluation forms for each segment. And then also we have these little pledge cards. If you would please pledge your support and get involved, and then turn those back in at the front desk. And yeah, so thank you.
All right, main event, student presentations. Woo! Let's get excited, younger generation. Okay, well, just as a quick introduction, we're behind on time, so we're going to try to go through this kind of quickly, but I hope you can absorb all of their hard work and the information that they're about to share with you. We've got 2 classes represented here. One is Sustainability 334, which is a practicum around environmental justice globally and locally. And these students in groups put together projects that had to address